So let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Neha Kumar, and I'm SIGCHI VP at Large. And in this role, I lead and manage global community support mechanisms within SIGCHI. So looking at both monetary and not. So the SIGCHI Development Fund, Gary Martin Travel Awards, the Voices of SIGCHI blog series, community events calendar. And I do all of this with the support of the incredibly talented SIGCHI Development Fund Committee. Some of the members are here today with us. The job that pays me is that of faculty at Georgia Tech, where I do research on the intersection of human-computer interaction and global development. So being of a global mindset and working across borders is crucial to my daily existence, and it has been for over a decade. I've been working and I'm employed in the US, but India is home for me. It's where I do most of my research, and it's also where I am at present and where I have been for a few months. Tremendously excited to kick off this talk series with a session on being global, because in my not so long time in the executive committee of SIGCHI, I've been in several conversations with many of you and others about how we really need to do more with regards to recognizing that we're not just a Western, just a US, a global North organization, but aspire to build HCI capacity and piece together a global existence that is inclusive of all people, cultures, and geographies, fostering global solidarity. So I'm very grateful to Helena Mentis, president of SIGCHI, for making space for these sessions, these roundtables, dialogues, talks, whatever we'd like to call them, and we'll have to wait and see. Alongside other members who care deeply about equity, to facilitate these conversations where we can listen and learn and better understand how our present and our future initiatives within SIGCHI can serve the community best. Other organizers include Shawen, Adriana, Vino, Stacy, Soraya, and Tess on the executive committee, with many thanks to Kale for taking on the hard job of moderation, and Miriam for being our sketch note taker. Also in these sessions, our hope is that all attendees will be equal, and so to ensure critical mass, we did extend invitations in advance to some folks who we thought would ensure rich discussion on these topics. You know who you are, and thank you for being here. And with that, I'm going to hand over charge to Kale.
Awesome. Yeah, so as mentioned, I'm Kale Passmore, he, him, or they, them, if you're feeling saucy. I'll be your humble and slightly over-caffeinated moderator for this session. And to situate myself a little bit, I'm an HCI researcher and knowledge worker, currently settled on unceded Treaty 6 territory in Canada, which is the ancestral and current homeland of the Métis and First Nations people, which includes the Cree, Lakota, Dakota, Nakota, Dene, Saulteaux, and numerous others. As a recognition of current impacts due to settler colonialism, I'm just going to start us off by saying Canada's richest have made over $37 billion since the start of this pandemic, while at last count, we have over 61 Indigenous communities without access to clean water. And with that, I'm going to have to really quickly cover the code of conduct in brief, and I'm sorry for being so rapid about that. It is available in full at a link that will be posted in the chat. So while I do so, this is a great moment to introduce yourself in the chat, providing your pronouns, location or institution, and whatever else you might like others to know about you. So as moderator, my role is to maintain the purpose of this event, to keep us on track and facilitate as equitable a space as possible. We'd like to ask that each time you begin speaking, you state your name, affiliation, and pronouns. The session will be recorded for the first hour. By attending this roundtable within that time of the first hour, you are consenting to participation, questions, comments, all being recorded. So this includes content that's posted to the chat. We will be recording off after this time to create space, about 20 to 30 minutes for those with comments who wish to remain off record. For the same reasons of privacy and consent, do not share content from the talk on social media. We will be posting this in full with additional accessibility options afterward. If you absolutely must discuss potentially harmful or stressful or sensitive topics, we ask that you provide everyone with a content warning. We have a range of accessibility options available, which include live captioning, live note taking and sketching, ASL, and we will have additional accessibility options when we post this afterward. Should you require additional services, please message me or one of the other organizers of this event. And with all that said, we do encourage constructive criticism and critique. Our time together here is to highlight the incredibly complicated interactions between individual experiences and systemic policies. We are an internationally diverse group, so be patient. Show sensitivity to anyone speaking. Keep aware of how much time and space you take up and that others may need a moment of silence to collect themselves before speaking. Be critical, be kind, be supportive. This is just one talk in a series, so certain topics or discussions may need to be postponed until that relevant talk, and I'm going to apologize in advance for cutting you off or delaying that if that's what needs to happen. Not everyone is here with the same education level or comes from the same culture when it comes to social issues, social justice, or matters of identity, and I'd like all of us to just keep that in mind. Not everyone has equal access to these communities or to that knowledge. So there may be times when identifying words or phrases that are insensitive or just don't feel right come up. If these issues or mistakes come up, take each other in good faith, offer a quick correction, and refocus on the topic of the moment. I'd like you all to remember that people's lived experiences are not up for debate. And in the event of harassment, discrimination, or additional needs required by another attendee or presenter, please message the moderator, which is me, or Elena, or Neha. And with all that housekeeping covered, let's begin with that first guiding question, which is, what are the big and small ways in SIGCHI's everyday operations that its global identity surfaces or is struggling to surface? If anyone wants to start us off, you can just right-click your face box in Zoom and raise your hand, and then I can unmute you.
I just want to add that people can actually unmute themselves if they've been made a co-host, and I'm still getting through the list, so I'm sorry, but just keep that in mind.
So anybody can contribute, just to be sure, or yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. I can go ahead quickly and I can say a few things.
Great, and then we'll turn to Andrew afterward.
Sure. So I'm Suleiman Shahid from LAMS, Pakistan, and I'm also representing Pakistan in Asian Development Committee. So, in one of the things I've seen in the last few years is the best way to have a strong global identity is to strengthen local identities. So and how do you make sure that the local groups are strengthened, they're being listened, and they have their own strong identities, and they feel that they're linked with a bigger global identity. I think one excellent examples which we have seen, which I think is going in the right direction from ACM SIGCHI, is Asian Development Committee. This represents an excellent example, excellent tool of quite a few countries with very diverse backgrounds, with very diverse needs, and also very diverse socioeconomic framework. For example, we have Japan and China, and then also India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, in one bucket. So then when you look at it, I think it also feels that this whole localization is also hierarchical in nature. You could always begin at Asian level, but then it has to go to a very grassroots level, which is all the way down to the maybe city level. But then when you start strengthening these communities at a city level, it becomes a very organic process, because then there is a friction of giving enough autonomous control to these bodies while still regulating it through a central body at the top, which is SIGCHI. So this friction has to be controlled also in a way that these local bodies have enough say. They feel that their identity is not being defined through a global body, but the global body also have to make sure that some rules are followed, so that some work can be done in a systematic way for these local bodies. So I think what SIGCHI has done very well is actually thinking in the right direction in making these smaller bodies. But I think where more work has to be done is on a hyper local level, where these groups who like to emerge with their own identities, and they want to redefine HCI or culture, or even global South in their own way. Global South is a much better term than development, but still, it has so many own definitions, and people in London might feel very differently about this global South than people actually living, in Pakistan and India. So I think uh, this whole phenomena of strengthening these local communities and local groups while being regulated by the global body, I think this friction, if we get it right, I think more work, we can see more progress. But I think this whole idea is going in the right direction from SIGCHI. Yeah. It's a good starting point.
That's great. Yeah. Just before we turn to Andrew, to build a little bit on what you're saying, does anyone have any comments or thoughts on what ways SIGCHI can improve on strengthening on that hyper local level? Whether that's missed opportunities or weaknesses based on our global operations, or I don't know, even current strengths, current things that are going really well.
Hi everybody. Hello. My name is Marisol Wong Villacres. Okay, let me remember what you said I need to say. My affiliation, I'm from Ecuador, a university called, it's a very long name, but we can just call it ESPOL. But I'm also a PhD student at Georgia Tech, hopefully soon to finish, and pronounced she, her. And I'm not quite sure how to answer that. I have thoughts about the local nature. And this is something that we've discussed with other people in the group also. And sorry for that. I don't know how to, I need to mute whoever is trying to chat. I close that. But I think one of the things that we've discussed is that we need to support more of these voices. And when I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about students, for instance, right? Like if there's small groups of students working at a certain university, let's say my university in Ecuador, and they want to, for instance, record videos where they explain the work that they've done and how that might be applicable to the context where they're living in, and the questions they might have. So how to promote those little things, they might be seen as little, to become a little bit more of like in the exchange of, so promoting exchange of experiences and mutual learning. And so I think that's where the issue that I see with, in general, all these large institutions is not only SIGCHI, is that because they need to cater to so many voices, then they have these rules that are super strict, right? And it doesn't matter how nice, or maybe nice is not the word, but how flexible you want to be, it's super hard. So we have in Latin America, we have a group, maybe there's many, but we have one like a Slack group. And when we're facing issues of, for instance, issues of keeping the Slack group alive, where you need maybe funding, that is maybe not so much of an option for institutions that are so big to promote, to help us in that sense, right? Because the institution is so big, in this case, SIG, CHI, ACM, et cetera, they have the rules. And so if we need to access that type of opportunity for funding, I think that's where the mismatch is, where you have these opportunities to go bottom up, and then you have the lack of flexibility. Yeah.
I think that's a really great point and a central tension. Yeah. Does anyone else have any comments on that? Perfect. Melissa?
Hi, my name is Melissa Densmore. I'm at University of Cape Town, she, her. And I think I always feel like I'm in an odd position being an American in Africa, being someone who's grown up, like considering herself, I guess, colored. But like now here, I definitely not colored. And I think there's a lot of ways SIGCHI succeeds, a lot of ways that SIGCHI fails. I think there's been a lot of efforts in recent years to be more globally inclusive, and that includes everything from the shift to journal-based conferences like CSCW that helps, I guess, a lot of researchers in developing countries basically be recognized for the work that they're doing, because conference papers are not recognized where journals are. Examples like, you know, all the effort that Neha and her team and have been putting into like basically making things in Kai more transparent, right? And I think a lot of that really came to the surface when Joefish and when Joefish was hosting or as general chair of Kai 2018, and he made as much transparent as he could. At the same time, like the number of publications coming from Africa that are being accepted to SIGCHI is like not very much. It's like, you know, 2 or 3 per year, where like actually maybe one of those or 2 of those is coming from an institution where the first author has an African affiliation, and others are coming from African researchers that are at American and European institutions. And like, I think that problem of, you know, encouraging participation in ACM conferences when over and over they're getting rejected and they don't understand why, is really like, it's a hard one to encounter, and it's a hard one to solve. And I think, you know, where Africa sits in this is an important thing. And I think we've seen regional conferences. I think I've been very admiring of the ways that there's so many ACM and ACM SIGCHI chapters in India and throughout Asia, actually, where we've got 3 in all of Africa. And that's if you include, you know, Egypt, which is not sub-Saharan Africa, right? And so, and even then when we formed the Protea Kai chapter for South Africa, I had to fight to say, look, we cannot name it after one city in South Africa like ACM requires us to, because that would fairly exclude a lot of the rest of South Africa, because they don't identify, and we don't have enough like people here doing HCI research that we can afford to have one separate chapter for each city. And I understand why those ideas are put in place, but the fact that I had to fight so hard to get a much more neutral name for the chapter is something I'm willing to do, but I don't want everybody else to be required to do. Other things, I think I really love that the Development Fund and the Gary Morrison Scholarship is now like much more flexible in terms of trying to pay for things in advance, so that researchers that do not necessarily have funds to buy a $1,000 plane ticket to attend a conference can still attend. Or actually, even better, everything's virtual now, so suddenly we can attend. And there's still issues of data and bandwidth and coverage and network connection, but like more people are being included than were being included before. So I feel like I could go on about this for like hours, but I want to let other people talk.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, especially because, you know, out of the many, many important things you've said, you're pointing directly at a policy, for example, where, you know, requiring a city be named for chapters, like that is an easier sort of fix that ends up being more inclusive of different regions, different like SIG needs, different community needs. I did see that Christian had something that, yeah, you wanted to mention.
Yes, thank you. So I think it's a very good initiative that's now going on, headed by Neha, creating the regional subcommittees in order to strengthen regional initiatives. And we had a lot of discussions as well about how to strengthen or how to organize as well the regional subcommittees. And one idea that we discussed a lot about were how to get students more involved. And there's one idea that I would like to point out, which is restructure the whole student competition organization for the CHI conference. Because if you look at this structure of the competition, it's dominated by a jury coming from the US and from Europe. It's dominated by participant groups coming from Europe and from the US and Canada. So, so there was one idea that we discussed to have, together with the regional subcommittees, maybe some kind of pre-CHI student competitions, so that whenever the student competition is going to be happening at the conference, every region will be represented. So, for example, the top 3 of each region could then be represented at the CHI conference with the prerequisite that the jury needs to be as well assembled from each region, so that you have maybe from each region, you have 2 representatives. And whenever you, so from my perspective, from my experience, whenever you connect the students from different regions, they are automatically going to cooperate in research projects in the future. So I've seen this a lot of times. So even encouraging setting up cross-regional student teams to participate in these competitions. So it's kind of a grassroots movement to bring new people into CHI and to bring people together in a way where the current borders that people have in their mind are crossed automatically just by collaborating together. So focusing on this area, I think, would bring a lot of new people into CHI, and from my experience, the students that have got this experience, they're here to stay. So this could be a really good initiative to focus on connecting the regional subcommittees when they're established, and to have this new structure for the competitions.
Yeah, I know it's also come up actually with concerns around reviewing standards, the sort of like Anglo-centrism of a lot of the publishing that happens, for example. But before I take up more space, I know Andrew has been waiting a while at this point, if you'd like to offer the comment that you had.
Sure, thank you, Kale. So I'm Andrew Kuhn. I'm at the University of New Hampshire, and my pronouns are he, him. And the first thing I wanted to say is thank you, Neha, and thank you, organizers. This is a wonderful event, and I think that every time I talk to Neha, I realize 2 things. And one is that she really understands where our community has, where it is and where it has needs. And I think this event is a reflection of that. And the other one is that she puts an enormous amount of work. So thank you for putting this together. And thank you to the other organizers as well. I wanted to say I'm the interim vice president for conferences. So one way that I think our community does succeed in this global aspect is when they put together, when conferences put together teams that are global. And, you know, we mentioned being online. I think there's a very big push now to make sure that you do have a worldwide coverage, right? Because things are happening at different time zones all the time. So you really, it's simply to your advantage to have a group of people who are spread out throughout the world. And I know that Vinoba, you're talking to various steering committees about how exactly the process works and putting together steering committees. And so I think I'm very much looking forward to seeing the results of that work. And then another thing I'm really excited about is, as we think about putting these committees together, simply the range the range of experiences that people have. I don't know if you had a chance to read this book called Range, but one of the arguments that it makes is in fact that the range of experiences we have is one of those things that really influences our success in various aspects of our work. And I think that, you know, this works both in terms of having teams that have range and also people who have range. So I think both of these aspects are exciting in terms of opportunity for setting up the committee, setting up the volunteer groups. You know, what is the range that they have in terms of their experiences? Because one person's experience in one country really might translate really well for ideas, for suggestions or solutions in another setting. So I think that's one of those opportunities we should look at.
I just
Yeah,
wanted to say
absolutely.
that Naya was unable to find the hand raise, and I'm not
No.
able to see it because I'm the host. But
I'm
I think it
unmuted,
should be at the
Neha.
bottom.
It's okay.
Okay, great. Okay.
Thanks. So yeah, so I mean, I can only echo what Andrew says here. Really, thank you for setting this up and organizing this. I'm probably one of those that would not normally take the opportunity to engage in these kinds of forums, and I do agree on a lot that has been said already by Suleiman and Andrew. I think it's really about creating opportunities. So it's really about making this both like having the range and creating enough opportunities for people to engage. But I think it's also a matter of thinking through what is the workload involved, right? So for many of us, some has, you know, for instance, I have my little family. Others, you know, just have lots of other things to prioritize, and to really be able to engage and put the effort into what it takes actually to have a voice in these forests, I think is something that we should be paying attention to as well. I was lucky enough to be part of ACM's Future of Computing Academy, and it gave me a place to practice. I think that's a really good initiative and place to start. But I do think it's necessary to have more opportunities, so that there are more like levels where you can also engage, and not necessarily with huge effort involved.
Yeah, and before it gets lost in the chat, Melissa had offered, oh yes, both global identity and lack thereof manifest in composition of organizing committees, steering committees, and program committees. Also thanks to the whole team. So if no one, is there anyone that had raised their hand that hasn't been called on yet? Okay, perfect. Then, yeah, Melissa?
Can I add something? So I wonder, because there are other organizations, international, that do HCI or HCI related things, like the IFIP WG 9.4, and even like, you know, local organizations in countries. And I had never really been sure of the relationship between IFIP and ACM and BCS and the British Computing Society, and I don't know what else is out there. But for people in my community, a lot of them are already just deep in IFIP, and so they don't have capacity to also do ACM, but they also don't necessarily feel like ACM has done anything for them, whereas IFIP has been actively recruiting their representation and building structures that include regional representation for a long time. And so I think there's something that we can learn from IFIP, but also like, why are we so separate? Why can't we work together? Why is there the IFIP conference and the CHI conference? Well, I mean, I understand that, but but you know, where does I mean, interact, I think, is at the intersection somehow, but like I think that it is part of our global identity, and I've never really pieced it together, maybe because I haven't been in leadership for either. Just talking to people in both that don't really talk to each other.
I can answer that, and I'm really sorry, I also cannot raise my hand. My name is Regina Bernhaupt. I'm currently Vice President for Membership and Communication. So the correspondence between IFIP and SIGCHI is that there is a representative of SIGCHI, which is associated to IFIP TC13. It's Gerrit van der Weer. And he's sitting in all these kind of meetings, and typically he's sending back to the president of SIGCHI reports of how the two things are getting aligned. This is related to double publications that are done at Interact, for example, and how that is possible also to be available in the ACM portal. And the other relationship that they typically do is, to a limited extent, is that the positioning of the Interact conference would not conflict with any positionings of other conferences like the CHI conference in the same years. So these are the two things which are currently already managed between the two organizations. To why they don't learn from each other better, I cannot make a statement. Right?
Yeah, if anyone else has any sort of comments, questions, concerns, criticisms around this idea of building communities of support, relationship buildings between different, relationship building between different organizations and cultures, or neglected regions even. I think that's a good thing to focus on for a couple minutes here. Daniel, I see you have your hand raised.
Hi, everyone. I also wanted to point out Daniel Gatica from ADA-PNPFL in Switzerland. My pronouns are he and him. And I was also going to point to the internal struggle of SIGCHI from the perspective of how many conferences we have that are supported by SIGCHI, and how the attendees of this conference is so diverse. And this discussion we're having today might not necessarily propagate to each of these conferences at the same speed or with the same depth that we would like. Just a quick comment on that.
And Marisol?
Hi again. Should I say again everything? I don't remember. Marisol. Okay, no. I'm going to say it again. So Marisol Wobillacres from Ecuador, and she's her. So I think one of the things that we've also discussed is maybe introducing, so taking more of the local to the global. So events like CHI, like CSCW, like these large, way larger events that we have local conferences. So that is one thing, right? And so local conferences, they produce important papers, and maybe we can have like a section of, these are papers that like for in CHI, presenting, sharing papers that have been best papers at local conferences, et cetera, where we can get to have a feeling of that. That's one thing that we can do, I feel. And then another thing, I don't know how feasible also, because larger events are just too large to sometimes make sense of. But so that's one thing. And the other thing is that for these different conferences, it could also work for different conferences like Interact. So maybe have a session where people from these different conferences can come together, or like, at least we can see their work somehow in different ways. And in general, have more discussion time in sessions. I feel like we get to ask questions. There's very little time actually to engage in rich discussions during the presentation of a paper. But I mentioned this before, I think it's important to start trying to ask questions that help us draw the connections. And it's not only for people who attend, but for people who are organizing this session, to be more of like, okay, what are the questions that we need to ask, so that we can start thinking about, okay, this paper is great for CSCW, but can also draw lessons for X, Y, and Z, other conference, et cetera, and vice versa.
Christian?
Yes, so just a quick idea that came to my mind. Could we have a flat rate for being registered at all SIGCHI conferences worldwide? so that automatically, with maybe some kind of an additional fee that we pay to our annual fee, same fee we pay, for example, for the digital library, we pay some amount of money, and then automatically we are registered to participate and attend virtually to any SIGCHI sponsored conference, as well the local conferences organized by the regional committees, so that the worldwide distribution of conferences is much more present in our daily life and our daily work. So we get automatically reminders of some regional conference. You might get put there some preferences that we would like to see papers on a certain topic. So we get notified when there's a paper on a special topic in a certain region, where we can see the presentation during the conference, and these type of things. So to automate the global awareness by paying some extra fee, same level of fees maybe as it's done today at for this year's CHI conference, that depending on which region you're coming from, you pay more or less the fee. So, and you have a student fee and so on and so forth. So maybe based even on your PCS profile that you've given there, what are your areas of interest whenever you review papers, you might get automatically pointed to certain conferences which have certain papers that you might be interested in, because the papers are automatically uploaded and reviewed by PCS. Could be an extension. And so if you pay a couple of $100 if you come from Europe or the US, and for this money you will get automatically a flat rate for participating virtually at the conferences. Just as a quick idea that came to my mind.
Yeah, so Suleiman here. I quickly wanted to sort of comment on this this idea of giving more importance to these papers which come from more local conferences. A few months ago, maybe a year ago, you know, I got reviews from there's less empathy for these things, you know. So I got a review from a journal that, among other things, one of the comments which was made by the editor was that I need to cite papers from more reputable conferences, you know, and one of the papers I had cited was from a local conference, and it was an excellent paper, you know. It should have been in any top conference, but it was just not there. It was just in a local conference. And I replied back and I said, the paper got about 350 citations and you might want to read it, and you will like it, you know, and that'll help you a lot. Of course, I didn't ever receive a reply, but paper got accepted later on. But I think these kind of things are there inherently, that you look at the title of the conference and then you feel that just because the paper was presented there would be of low quality. And that's not always the case, you know. These conferences produce excellent papers, and I think this is a matter of exercising empathy in our own field, actually.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. I'm going to take a very odd attempt here to bring a few things together, and maybe we can start generating more like individual experiences like that, which you've just offered here. So on the one hand, we've brought up these issues of certain communities, geographies being neglected. Africa, for example. We also have like very low representation in the circumpolar north. In the regional south, we can still see a lot more work being done here. There are different things that are working. There are certain aspects that aren't, and support for these smaller local chapters, whether that's in terms of like supporting the publication, recognizing the value and credentials of it, or just not judging based on like biggest venue equals best paper. These are a few of the things that have been brought up at this point. Does anyone have anything else that they might like to add onto this? See Kaylee, pronouns she, her, offering in chat. Decreasing the geographical barriers is so big and impactful. However, tricky is an understatement here. I would love to be able to more easily find papers in local venues, and it's hard to navigate these conferences. And it's hard to know where to look and how to navigate these conferences. There are so many different barriers to attending the big ones, be it money, personal reasons, accessibility, or just not being able to ethically reconcile the idea of burning all these fossil fuels to watch talks for 4 days. And Stacy has added, maybe cross-conference paper awards could raise the profile of more regional communities. I also see that Melissa, you have your hand up. I'm just going to hold off on for 1 second and see if anyone who hasn't spoken yet might have something to offer here. And if not, the floor is all yours, Melissa.
I love the idea of cross-conference paper awards. I think that's amazing. I think one thing that I think was highlighted that maybe didn't come in your summary was just shift in reviewer culture around how we, I mean, wanting to have really constructive reviews, but like, I've seen some reviews that are like too personal or like just a little fierce for, especially for, I mean, just treating every paper author as maybe, okay, no, don't treat them all as junior authors, because if they aren't, that can be incredibly insulting, but like treat them all as human beings that are trying to learn, and treat the review process as a conversation where we're trying to collectively improve conversations in our field and improve, you know, how we understand the world. And I, you know, I think there's easy to do, oh, that's not really Kai, or that's not Kai in the right way, or, oh, you know, like they didn't use the right vocabulary here. And, you know, people don't all have the same vocabulary. You shouldn't have to have a supervisor or an advisor who's previously published at Kai in order to publish at Kai, but you pretty much do. If you don't have somebody to mentor you on how to write ACM, SIGCHI papers in the right style and the structure and implications for design, then your papers get summarily rejected. And I think the shepherding process is really important for that. I think a revise and resubmit process with shepherding is great. I've tried doing mentorship programs, but like either nobody signs up or like, or it just kind of peters out somehow and nobody really understands how the relationship should go, because they're built on like these ephemeral connections. They're not built on real relationships. And I don't know how to build those real relationships. I've seen myself that in the past 6 years, when I've been busy having 3 kids and living living a whole continent away from everybody else, that I've just, you know, lost relationships in Kai. And some of them are strengthened through lots of virtual interactions, but a lot of the more casual relationships, because I don't want to be stuck on Facebook all the time, I've just lost track of people. And it's hard if you can't go to all the conferences, right? Because that's where those relationships get maintained and renewed and refreshed. And I don't know how that works in the virtual environment. I don't know how to get around that, but I think I started with reviews and I've ended up with relationships. Both are important.
Yeah, changes to the reviewing culture and how to encourage more adequately and appropriately representative reviewing processes, I think has been something that we've seen come up quite a lot, which is great. I have a couple comments here. One from Marisol saying, thinking about moving across borders, another aspect to maybe consider is to motivate more global reviewers to participate as reviewers in local conferences. And let's see here. Yeah, possibly selected regional conference papers having a chance to get republished at Tokai or PACM HCI. It's all about relationships, says Stacy. And Pushpendra says, like we have 2 days reserved for workshops, 1 day could also be reserved for regional conferences. And Miriam, I think you have something you wanted to add.
Yeah, hi everybody, Mariam, she, her from LUMS. I just want to sort of emphasize this really great point that Melissa just raised around relationships. And I've, in my own work, once I moved from Germany to Pakistan, I lost some of those relationships too, and then I made new ones. And I know that, my new relationships within the community have had such a great impact on my work and my growth as an academic. And I think that that's one of the things that new researchers coming from the global South. So if you're from a university that's not in the US or in Europe, that's not something you would naturally have access to unless your advisor had access to those collaborations in the US or in Europe. And those are really, really useful in helping you navigate the community and helping you understand how to write for CHI or for CSCW. And again, as everybody has mentioned, being accepted at CHI and at CSCW, regardless of all the repercussions or sort of all the sort of debate surrounding it, it is important for your careers, right? If you're a young researcher, it's very hard to get around by saying, okay, on principle, I'm just going to submit to CHI or CSCW. You end up doing it. And just having those connections or those relationships with faculty that is not from the global South does help. And I think one way, as Melissa mentioned, is setting up mentorship programs that connect faculty in the US with young researchers in the global South, perhaps, that have similar interests and similar areas of research.
Yeah, mentorship is a fantastic, mentorship is great. I think we should always have more of it. There's a comment here from Vino saying, I like the idea of co-hosting a regional conference with an international one whenever we can. And Michael, I believe you had something that you wanted to add?
Yeah, thank you. Several things. And I'm really loving this conversation. I wanted to start there. I'm beginning to think that maybe we need to broaden our idea of what a CHI paper looks like, broaden it really a lot. We're excluding cultures, we're excluding sub-disciplines in our own conference culture. Who is our Michael in that statement? I'm not even sure. I think it's everybody on this call and more. And so I guess I want to say, I'm sorry that I said our conference culture, because I'm still a North American and I don't know what I'm talking about on a global scale. And that's really a problem for me as a reviewer or as an AC. And it's something I need to grow up from. Because I certainly learned the North American or the Euro-Western CHI genre. Sure, I can do that, not always successfully. But I don't know how to write for other audiences, and I don't know how to write more globally. And that's a deficit of me. I mean, we talk about deficit models. I think we should be talking more about North Americans and Western Europeans as their deficits also, the deficits that we have in comparison with the world. And therefore, just to tie things together with what Mariam said a moment ago, yes, it would be a good idea to have mentoring from the Euro-Westerners to the rest of the world, and I will not use the phrase reverse mentoring. I need to be mentored by people who are unlike me. And I think a lot of us who are Euro-Westerners need that mentoring also. That's peer mentoring back and forth. That's not one person knows more than the other. It's co-mentoring, it would be my model. I've talked already too much, so I'm going to be quiet. Thanks.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Just to try and catch up here while we can. Melissa has added that I also love the South-South relationships I've built up over the years. So great getting to know you and your awesome work, Miriam. Christian, I know that you have a comment. I'm just going to keep with the chat for now and then really quickly turn to Slido, and then the floor is yours. We have a comment saying, I wonder how have people observed any language and or cultural gaps between CHI and the local CHI communities? My experience of teaching in Asia in the past was that researchers and students often felt being disadvantaged as second language speakers. And Melissa has said, I've shifted over the years to be more forgiving of writing, not in precise American or British English. As long as it is understandable, does it matter if people mix up dialects? So Slido, we have 3 comments. To start with the first, what are SIGCHI's efforts towards standardizing HCI education across the globe? Example, India has only 2 to 3 universities focusing on HCI. How do you increase awareness? Or the second question that you can speak to, I'd like to mention the awards process. I think it doesn't take into account the wide range of contributions from folks in the global south because of the way, hold on. Neha, do you have the rest of that?
No, that was it. And actually, it might be because she's on the road and she's typing on her phone or something.
Because of the way we've always done it this way. So the same types of people, Global North, become rewarded. And because we don't know people or don't know how to value their contributions. Okay. Yeah. So Marisol, you've had your hand up for a little bit. If you want to take over for a minute.
Just referring back, thank you. Referring back to what Michael was saying, and Marianne was pointing at it. Think of mentorship, which is, I believe it is very needed. I think it is, with time, we sometimes forget that with interacting with large institutions, it needs to be the back and forth. And so we believe, okay, we need to find the most experienced person globally to be kind enough to provide their knowledge to those who don't know. And the truth is that there's much that is known from the people who don't know. Like the people who don't know a lot. And so we forget that it's in my line of work, my research, and I work with Hispanic parents here in the US, I've noticed that whenever they are offered help, they don't attend the help. They don't go to the help. And I firmly believe, because of all my work, that it's because it's being posed as that. You need my help because you don't know. And then that just disregards all the knowledge that there's out there. And so I think we also need to, I mentioned this already, but I think I want to stress it again, the horizontal, it needs to be stressed more. The learning, like for instance, students or academia members in Ecuador can learn a lot from people in Uruguay, Argentina, India, in other countries, Pakistan and other countries we have so many similar experiences, honestly, right? And because we're always aiming at being known at the global, that we disregard that because we're aiming to become something very, it's kind of a monolith way of looking at stuff.
And Pranjal, if I'm saying that correctly, please feel free to correct me. As added in chat, I personally feel that we can take lots of advantages by updating and adding some new features to the SIGCHI mobile app, such as one, along with geographic SIGCHI chapters, we can maintain a global current research interest-based chapters. 2, looking for collaboration or open for collaboration type status for each member profile. 3, notification about upcoming local and global conferences and recommendation for reading a paper that falls under predefined categories. 4, working as sub-reviewer for senior reviewers so that new people can learn in a better way to review the papers and can later become a senior reviewer with a recommendation from the senior reviewer. Yeah, sorry, Suleiman.
So I'd also like to plus one excellent point made by Melissa and also extended by Mariam on this mentorship. And I think what we have seen in our work is also that when mentorship comes from people, for example, South supporting South, then it's easy to understand. People relate much more easily, especially the young, PhD students. And I think for them, they don't feel ashamed that they are not kind of up to the mark if they're not being the best of the best, in terms of their HCI work. So I think this collaboration, horizontal collaboration between different countries has to be extended, and we should really work on that. And I think in this way, the Asian Development Committee started some of the work earlier, that how different regions can collaborate. How can we have local conferences? For example, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh started a lot of activities. HCI for South Asia is an excellent example, where we're doing lots of webinars. We're trying to work together. We're trying to sort of help each other, working on a new HCI curriculum together, to make sure that we understand each other's needs and extend each other. So I think this kind of a collaboration can also be extended, more horizontally, and I can see a lot of growth in that idea. So I think that's one point. Another point is, I think is also important that when we try to tackle these issues in a local context, one approach doesn't always work, So I give you one quick example, that one of the ways when I started working in Pakistan after spending about 15 years in Europe, I really wanted to start an HCI conference in Pakistan. I came back to Pakistan. I thought, let's do HCI Pakistan. And it was very difficult. There was no design conference at that time in Pakistan. And so when I wanted to start HCI Pakistan, but then I did my research as a kind of a human-centered design researcher, and I talked to people in the local industry, in academia, in different universities. It turned out there was not much support for HCI at that stage, but there was a lot of support and +1 for UX. So what we did actually, we converted the whole idea of starting from HCI into a UX conference, and then we built this academia industry partnership, and then started this conference. That became the biggest conference in Pakistan. And only after 3 years, what we did, we started bringing more HCI research work into the conference. So there was a UX conference, but then we had a track where people would talk about basic research, how to go into the field. And then only now in the 5th year, we think we can do an HCI Pakistan, and we are working on that, as a small one-day event. So I think one has to look at the local needs and the strategy, and sometimes this might not be the best way to start with a very academic conference. Sometimes business runs the show sometimes, so you need to support the business. And if you can support the business by doing an event which actually brings money and show the ROI, I think in this way, you can actually build a community which can actually help academia also in the long run. So I think this approach of being flexible is important.
Awesome. Nick, I think you also had something that you wish to add.
Hi, Nick, Namibia, she, her. Hello. I think the point that I'd like to make, it sort of brings in sort of almost anything everybody's said, but hasn't actually said it. And it's about trust between the motives behind crossing borders. So we build up trust, like Melissa said, in our sort of personal relationships. But it's very fragile if the power relationships are highly asymmetrical. So we know situations where we'll build relationships with the global north, but actually all it is to do is because they want access to communities to work on. Likewise, I'm sure that global north people feel sensitive if they feel that perhaps a global south person is is somehow exploiting them for their own career gain, sort of in a way to sort of get Google funding or whatever. So there's that trust aspect in the sort of interpersonal relationship way, which has to be expressed and confronted. It's not something that just magically goes away, regardless of all of these excellent ideas. And the second thing is the sort of broader systemic thing in which that's embedded, which is the major tech giants are important career destinations for many of our students and many of our community. But they're also a vehicle that drives decision-making, ways of teaching, and all sorts of elements of technology. at every level in the Global South, not always to the benefit of the Global South. And that is a very tricky and difficult issue that isn't just going to go away. Google is doing deals with our telecom providers here, which are monopolies. It happens all over the continent, right? So it's obviously the individuals in our community are not particularly associated with that, but the broader systemic scenario is. So I think it's just sort of important to flag that we can all make individual efforts, but there are these systemic issues that we're all seated in and within that don't magically go away just by building good relationships, and that needs to be discussed at some point. Thank you.
Yeah, Nick, you're elaborating on something I think that's really important here, and has actually come up a little bit in the chat. Miriam had mentioned, relationships over mentoring and how we do that. Maintaining those relationships is one of the main ways we avoid that exploitative, ethnographies and anthropologies. Yeah, just like part of academia is really ugly we are running a bit short on time, so we're going to stop the recording now. We encourage you to stick around, keep with us here. We can keep chatting. We'll be doing so without the recording. So
just before we end, can we just announce the next session just so that it's in the recorded part? So that's on Thursday, March 18th. And that's going to be a session on making SIGCHI accessible. That's going to be coordinated by Stacy and Soraya, who are the ACs for accessibility. And then the next session is going to be on reviewing and mentorship, and that's March 31st. And April 1st, actually, it's an odd time. Just wanted to quickly also mention that we're sorry about the times not working out for everybody across the globe, but we're definitely going to try to rotate them. And that's also why we want to summarize these sessions as much and as effectively as possible. All feedback is welcome. And with that, I think we can close the recording for this one and then continue off the recording.